Welcome to Wager Talk TV. I am Kelly Stewart, joined by the king of preseason himself. That's right, at Cal Sports LV, Ralph Michaels, the man with the pen. Ralph, welcome in. 10 days from now, August 3rd, the Hall of Fame game. And it was really funny when I first met you on my first season at Wager Talk, and you said, Kelly, we crushed the preseason. I said, why on earth would anybody want to bet the preseason, Ralph?
Well, Kelly, it goes back to my history. Managing North Coast Sports and Phil Steele Publications for over 10 years. Anytime someone signed up for the Power Sweep, they got the preseason for free. That was the way to impress people, get them to sign up for the season. So I learned a lot doing the preseason for all those years. But basically, everything you see in the free Wager Talk preseason guide are things that I look at. And what I've told people, Kelly, that ask the same question as you just did, it's one of the only times in sports when you can bet on a coach and a team that want to win a game against a coach and a team that does not care to win. It's all about having that information.
I love it, Ralph. 67.2% in the preseason, 76.6% on 4 and 5% plays since 2015. That is by my count, because that is when I joined Wager Talk. Ralph charges $99. Why? Because he wants you to be on board. Make sure you guys head over to Ralph's page. You can download the NFL preseason guide for free on Ralph's page. Ralph, let's get into this. Things have changed a little bit as far as the preseason goes. Basically, since COVID, now there's only 3 games. Let's talk about that first.
Kel, I want to mention one thing that changed at Wager Talk about preseason. New this year as well, we are adding a weekly live interactive chat during the preseason. Once a week on Wednesday, I'll answer your questions. We'll break down what happened last game. We'll look ahead to what's happening this game, what adjustments we need to make. That's just an additional $49, a regular $199 value on the preseason package. So if you head to my page, you'll see $99 for plays only or $148 for plays and the video chat. Things that have changed, as you mentioned, Kelly, in the NFL. Well, when we went and handicapped the preseason 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, you basically had every game being lined at 1, 1.5, 2. You rarely saw threes. You rarely saw totals of 35 or higher. What changed? Well, coaches realized several years ago when we had the COVID year and we did not have a preseason, the players didn't need to be risked and hurt during preseason. So many coaches changed the way, the philosophy they play their starters and their stars. Also, what changed quite significantly when we went to the 17-game schedule 2 years ago, we only went with preseason games 3 weeks long as far as the schedule goes, plus occasionally the Hall of Fame game. So it's changed the way coaches coach. It's changed the way coaches have played players, and being able to adjust is how you keep successful when handicapping the preseason.
All right, Ralph, you've got some nerd charts for us here. But first, let's talk about rookie quarterbacks in preseason games, because we've kind of seen a shift there as well.
It has fell from 2013 to 2020. Only 6 rookie quarterbacks started in game number 1. 2 years ago, we saw Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, and Mac J at New England all start, plus Justin Fields played after 4 snaps. Last year was a little bit different. Remember, no quarterback was drafted in the first 3 rounds except Kenny Pickett, and he started. This year, Bryce Young on top of the depth chart, C.J. Stroud at Houston, Anthony Richardson's a question at Indianapolis, and Will Levis at Tennessee, another question. So we're going to see a lot of rookie quarterbacks starting game 1. We'll have to see how those coaches handle those situations.
So for these nerd charts, I love, Ralph, how you broke them up into a top 6. So we're going to talk coaches, quarterback rotations, information, records, stats, and scheduling and situations. So let's bring up that first nerd chart and talk about the most important thing in preseason, and that is coaches, including some of those offensive and defensive coordinators.
Kelly, when I break down the preseason, I basically look at these 6 categories, and I actually go old school. I check who has the coaching edge, who has the quarterback rotation edge, who has the situational edge, who has the information edge, and that's how I break down the preseason. Well, coaches are this. We know coaches. Some coaches want to win the preseason. John Harbaugh at Baltimore has won 18 straight games. That's right. He's 18-0 in the preseason, an incredible record, 15-3 ATS. Sean McDermott for the Bills. He has done an incredible job. The last 2 years, 5-1 straight up, 5-1 ATS. So I took the top 4, which you'll see in the chart, and I took the bottom preseason coaches and just sort of broke them out for you. But looking at the bottom of the chart, we used to have Mike Zimmer at Minnesota, who was one of the best head coaches in preseason football. Well, guess what? Kevin O'Connell takes over. What has he done? 0-6 straight up, 1-5 against the spread in preseason action. At Seattle, Pete Carroll used to be an incredible preseason head coach. Guess what? He is now stable. It doesn't matter to him. 1-5 straight up, 1-5 ATS. I do also want to mention there are 5 new head coaches this year. Arizona, Carolina, Denver, Houston, and Indianapolis. Throw out every record for those teams in the last few years. Let's not worry about those teams. What we do have to look at are the second-year head coaches. Will they continue to do what they did last year or change? We'll have to see. 2 head coaches that went 7-0 combined for the Bears and the Raiders, Eberflus and McDaniels. And there were actually 3 head coaches that went 0 for straight up and 0 for against the ATS. Todd Bowles at Tampa Bay, Peterson at Jacksonville, and Brandon Staley for the Chargers. So we'll keep track of those quarterbacks and be ready to make adjustments on those head coaches.
Ralph, I have a question. You mentioned first-year head coaches, particularly with new teams, but as a Denver Broncos fan, as you can tell by the Denver Broncos helmet over my left shoulder, Sean Payton does historically do well in the preseason. Are we just throwing that out the window completely, or do you think he might try to be looking to make a splash here?
Kelly, I take about half of what a coach did at a previous camp and then work it in. But let's remember, when we're looking at what Sean Payton did his first few years with the Saints, we were talking about an inexperienced young head coach trying to make his name on a program. He doesn't need to prove anything to anybody this year. So whatever his mentality is, we'll have to see and make adjustments. But that's why you can't look at what he did in New Orleans and now look at what you think he's going to do in Denver.
Very good point. Thank you, Ralph. Let's bring up the next chart. Quarterback rotations. I got to know, who's the best of the best here, Ralph, and who do we really want to back in this preseason?
In the preseason guide, you're going to see I have the quarterback rotations listed. And from this chart you're going to look at, I think these are by far the best quarterback rotations in the country. Why? I list how many career starts each quarterback has had, how many starts at the current team, how many seasons with the current team, and how many career games each quarterback played. I also highlight them green if they played with this team last year. There are 3 quarterback rotations that absolutely stand out for me: Pittsburgh, Buffalo, and Baltimore. Example, Baltimore has Lamar Jackson, Tyler Huntley, and Anthony Brown, all back from last year. Their 4th-string quarterback, Josh Johnson, who started 9 games, who also played back here and has 39 career games played. You look at Buffalo, Josh Allen, Matt Barkley, both back. Your number 2 quarterback, Kyle Allen. This guy has made 19 starts, 23 career games played, even though it's his first season. That's the type of veteran you know is going to fill the gap. And Pittsburgh's rotation, wow, Kenny Pickett, Trubisky, Rudolph, all back. They do have a rookie in Tanner Morgan, so we'll see how much they play him. Clearly, those are the top 3.
Yeah, I kind of have to wonder about some of those for the preseason, because during the regular season, we know who we're going to see. We know exactly who's going to start pending any kind of injury. Do you take that information as we go into the next chart? How do you manipulate that to make a play, right? So we know a coach may say something in a press conference that we've seen in years past. Tom Brady, he's going to play 1 snap. Aaron Rodgers, maybe the first quarter. When you have that kind of information and you use it to make a play, can you go into that a little more in depth?
It is, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in another section when we're talking about information, what to believe and what to not. But that is why, Kelly, this year to the preseason, we'll talk about this in a minute as well, I added the last 2 years of preseason stats. So you can see which coaches played their stars, which coaches did not play their stars, how many snaps each of those quarterbacks took. So the best we could do going into week 1 is decipher the information the quarterbacks are giving us and then determine what happens. One more thing I also want to mention on quarterback rotations is when you have a strong number 3 or number 4 quarterback, it gives you a massive edge. If your starter's only going to play 5 snaps, 7 snaps, 1 series, the best you're going to do is get 1 score out of that quarterback. When you have a number 3 playing the entire second half, it's more important who your number 3 is relative to who your number 1 is. So take a look at the quarterback rotations I put. Look at the number 3s and look at the number 4s. My top number 3s this year, Matt Barkley at Buffalo, Sam Ehlinger at Indiana, and Malik Willis at Tennessee. Those are all guys that made starts at their current team last year and are now the number 3 quarterback. That's a huge advantage. The best number 4s, David Blau at Arizona, Chris Streveler at the New York Jets. And Chris Streveler may be a name you're not familiar with. This guy last year was 24 of 33 for 277 yards, completed 73% for the Jets, a 5-1 ratio. He played at Minnesota, went to South Dakota, wasn't drafted, played for Winnipeg for a few years, played for Arizona for a few years. So we have an experienced quarterback that nobody knows that had an incredible preseason for the Jets. I'll have my eye on him looking at the Jets, but more importantly, if you have a game where Streveler's playing the second half, you have an incredible live betting situation on the New York Jets with their number 4 QB.
That is exactly what I was getting ready to ask you. Are some of these guys, or some of these plays, rather, better to be looking in game because maybe a coach told you that you would see the starter, or maybe somebody pulls a hammy and they don't want to risk it at that type of time, right? Let's say you got your laptop open, you're ready to put in some live bets. There are a handful of quarterbacks you're looking at to do that with, or is it kind of a case-by-case basis?
It is. Again, it's really those couple that I've mentioned right now. I keep my eye on the 3s and the 4s, and I also like this. To me, it's important. If a quarterback, there are times that a coach rotates quarterbacks. I'm not a fan of that. You don't get in sync. You play one quarterback with your 1s, another quarterback with your 1s, then a quarterback with the 2s, and the same quarterback with the 2s, because he wants to see how they handle different situations. To me, that's not a positive. It's a negative. I have no problems if you're sitting out a starter and you're playing a second and third string and you're going against the opposite team's 1s for a series or 2. To me, no problem. It's the time you have, the timing you have with your offensive line, the timing you have with your running back and wide receiver unit. So I will take a number 2 and a number 3 all day long versus a team playing a 1, 2, and 3 with each of those players playing a full half.
Appreciate you guys hanging out with us. I'm going to promo Ralph once again because he puts in so much hard work. NFL preseason Ralph is 67.2% over all preseason plays since 2015. $99, and you can get all of his preseason plays, or for $159, you can get Ralph's plays plus hang out with him every single Wednesday doing his weekly breakdown. Ralph, let's keep going with these nerd charts. I brought up information earlier. The very first thing you have here is elite quarterbacks in reference to their offensive line.
It is, and this really encompasses this. There are coaches that tell you the truth in preseason, and there are coaches just flat out lie. They just say things to get off. Andy Reid used to be one of those coaches. Whatever Andy Reid said in the preseason, you used to bet the opposite side. Now, last year, he didn't do that. Yeah, he is the worst. He is the one that comes to mind. So I actually have a note. When I write down coaches and their quotes and what they say, and I read transcripts of their press conferences, I jot down what they have. I go back, I watch the film of the game, and I see if they said exactly what they did. So that's just another piece of work you're putting in and week out. No easy. There's not one formula. There's not an easy path to success in the preseason. It's really delving into it. But this chart, Cal, I think this is probably the most important chart that I can show you today. And if you are going to play an elite quarterback, guess what? I am 99.99% sure that you are playing your starting offensive line. You are game planning blocking. You are likely keeping a running back in. You are not going to let your quarterback get hit. So I mentioned Andy Reid. Let's show you this chart. These are the last 2 years for each quarterback in the preseason. Like I said, we have these for each team. The blue means they were with that team. They are currently with that team, so you can see what you have. So look at Buechele and look at Mahomes. Mahomes has played quite a bit. 26 completions, 26 attempts last year, 29 attempts in 2021. He has a 5-1 ratio. He does score his first drive. It's a great first quarterback when KC is playing Mahomes. But look at the sacks to the far right. In 2 seasons, Mahomes has taken 55 pass attempts. He's been sacked 0 times. Guess what? When Mahomes comes out, look at Buechele. Buechele has had 106 attempts. He has been sacked 9 times. So take advantage of when the starter is in with a coach you can trust. Look to play him first quarter, and you will find some advantages. Game plan we talked about. Go ahead, Kel.
No, I was getting ready to ask you, as far as like getting down action, right? We know that sometimes it's easier said than done. Most books in Vegas giving first quarter bets out?
Well, you know what? We've seen with DraftKings and FanDuel pooling a lot of the states. They have changed some situations where we can. You weren't able to do that before. You were able to bet halves, but I saw some quarters popping up the last couple years. So we'll see what happens. I think they will. And again, if you're in Vegas, it may not be the easiest thing because we know FanDuel and DraftKings allows so much more than a lot of other places do. So, it's just something that if you can take advantage, do. So when we're talking to the public like this, I would not put a play on that unless I know it's available to at least 90% of my customers.
Okay, perfect. That's the only caveat, because I remember years past sitting at, Superbook and being like, okay, we need to get down to the first quarter, and you walk up and your only available option was the first half. But I have seen more offerings as of late. I was just making sure that was something that everybody would be able to get down on if that was the case.
It is, and we'll see. I won't be using week 1 first quarters, so we'll see what happens week 1. I'll take it and then move on from there. But a couple other things to look for. When you have a legitimate quarterback battle and the coach says, hey, we're down to a quarterback battle. Denver was in that situation last year. You know that, Relly, with Ripien and Johnson. Guess what? They only played 2 quarterbacks the entire preseason. They went 2-1 straight up in ATS. They won both of their home games. Quarterback battles are something that you have to pay attention to. You don't have to listen to coaches often because the press will usually tell you when it's a legitimate quarterback battle for number 1. Game planning. No one game plans for an entire game, but some coaches do say, listen, this is the way we're treating like a regular season game. We're going to stay at a hotel. We're going to have meetings the same time as we eat. We're going to talk about the game plan. So while they're not really game planning for an entire game, they do mock out their first drive, their first few series to get their young players accustomed to what they have to get ready for week 1 of the regular season. So that's something else you look for, and information and whether to use it or not, unique trips. A couple years ago, I think it was the Lions. They flew out to the West Coast. And they flew back the same day. It was the final week of the regular season. He played absolutely nobody. They got crushed. So we'll talk a little more about scheduling, but anytime you hear those unique situations, off a Sunday night game and now you're playing on Friday, we have a short week. Guys are banged up. We have to give them an extra day off. That's the type of reading you have to do to find out which teams have those advantages.
All right, Ralph, let's move on to records. You got another nerd chart for us here. What do we make of this? Some of these could be a little deceiving, or you think they're pretty true to form?
Well, we know what Buffalo does. We know what Baltimore does in the preseason. We know what bad teams do. So let's look at the difference. So in the Wager Talk preseason guide, I have the 2021 and 2022 categories for stats and preseason games only. I have their ranks, and then I have the yard per game and point per game diffs, how good a team did. So if you see in this chart, Buffalo was 2-1 last year. They were plus 90 yards per game. They were dominant. The game they lost, they said they weren't playing anyone. No big deal. So where do we find the value? Well, a couple places I want to mention. Number one, Washington. Washington was actually number 3 last year, Kelly, at plus 51 yards per game, but they went 0-3. In game 1 against Carolina, they lost by 2 points. They had a 72-yard edge, but they turned the ball over twice and gave up a late score. Game 2, they lost to Kansas City. Guess what? KC had 2 TDs the final couple minutes. They were -1 in turnover. And in Baltimore, they had a big lead against Baltimore. Baltimore came back, and they still had a 60-yard edge. So Washington's a team I'm going to look at, perhaps getting some value. Carolina is the opposite side. Carolina went 2-1 last year, but they were -66 yards per game. Game 1 was against Washington when they had those plus two turnovers. They shouldn't have won that game. That affects both Carolina and Washington. And the other game they won was Buffalo when they rested everyone up 21-0. I just talked about the Buffalo. So Carolina and Washington are the 2 teams that jump out to me. Washington, again, has Rivera, an old-time coach who we know what he does, that I think will find some value with the Commanders this year because of that. So when you're looking at records, make sure the stats equal what the records say. When a team is great, like Buffalo, like Baltimore, when a team is crappy like Philly absolutely didn't care, shouldn't have even won their one game they had. I have that note there. On the last play of the game, or late in the fourth quarter, they had a 55-yard touchdown, 1-play drive on a broken play by the Cleveland defense. They weren't even trying to win the game. They got outgained by 93 yards per game. So we'll see what Philly does, but they certainly have fade written on the schedule for this year.
All right, preseason fades. I love it. Ralph, let's talk about those stats and what we should be looking for. You got 2 charts for me. The first one, quarterback preseason stats for the last 2 seasons.
Again, I'm sort of just breaking down to help you when you look at the Wager Talk free preseason guide, what the data is and how to use it. So the top quarterback rotations there, you see Pittsburgh. In 2021, Mason Rudolph, Haskins, Roethlisberger, Dobb. But look at the completion percentage, 63, 80, 75, 63. Well, last year, Trubisky, Pickett, and Rudolph. Look at those percentages, 70, 80, and 66. All 3 of those guys are back. That's why they're highlighted in blue. But what does that tell you? Well, that tells you that Tomlin in Pittsburgh wants his players set up to have success. In the regular season, you can dink and dunk. You get down to the red zone. They play defense differently, and they stop you in the red zone. You're not playing that type of same defense. If you have a dink and dunk offense in the preseason where quarterbacks have success, have high completion percentages, don't throw interceptions, you don't have that same red zone defense, so you're analyzing the stats much differently for a dink and dunk offense than you do in the regular season. But look at the Rams. The Rams only played 2 quarterbacks 2 years ago. They only played 2 quarterbacks. Well, guess what? We know they jettisoned all those quarterbacks. So despite having only 2 quarterbacks each of the last 2 years, the Rams will not be returning any of ones. Those are the type of quarterbacks you're going to want to look to fade. So do spend quite a bit of time when breaking down each team's quarterbacks and those stats in the guide for the last 2 years.
All right, next up, this one's kind of surprised me. I didn't think sacks would be a stat that we'd be looking at in the preseason.
Oh, I'll tell you what, Kelly. Sacks are the most misleading stat there is. When a team is going to blitz, you absolutely want to bet on them on the preseason. Very few teams have that type of mentality. Houston last year. Houston came in, Lovie Smith, first-time head coach there, first year. He was also the DC. He led the team in sack percentage. His team gave up less than 10 points per game, and his sacks were dominant. So you look at the teams that have very few sacks allowed on offense. Your offensive line playing in units. Those teams normally don't mix and match. Some teams play their 1s, their 2s, and their 3s together. If you find those teams, it's a big advantage. Some teams mix and match. They put their ones and their twos and their threes and want to see how guys play together. Other guys want to see how they play together in practice. So a big advantage. So look for those teams that, number one, want to say they are going to blitz. Look for those teams that say, we're going to play vanilla. I don't care what they do on defense. We're just going to play this base defense. Those are the teams you want to fade again, or look to play the overs. So if you look at the chart for both offense and defense for each of the last 2 years, you'll see impressive numbers. There are a couple of anomalies there. The Raiders gave up a lot of sacks, but yet they still went 4-0 straight up. So just because you have the numbers doesn't automatically mean success. But if you look at the 2-year numbers of those teams that don't give up sacks, look at the high ATS percentage they've had. So sacks, to me, the number one most underrated stat in preseason, because it can make all the difference in game planning.
All right, last but not least, scheduling and situations and how they pertain to the preseason. Ralph, we know Hall of Fame game is August 3rd. How did teams that played in the Hall of Fame game fare in preseason game number 2?
Kel, if anyone here is an old-timer like me, 10 years ago and back, you would do this. Whoever's playing in the Hall of Fame game, you would play them the next week. They had the extra game. They got to come in camp earlier. They were more prepared. That has completely changed the way teams practice and practice early. In the chart, I actually have the Hall of Fame results. The Hall of Fame game used to be a dead under. Now, 3 of the last 4 have gone under. Last year, it did go over. But following game, the straight-up loser has actually gone 0-4 straight up in ATS the last 4 years. So if you have the mentality that thinks, okay, I used to always bet the Hall of Fame game, that's something that's changed as well. So make sure you adjust on that. But there is an entire chart in the guide. Every Hall of Fame game since 2000, who covered, what the line was, if it went over or if it went under. And for the last 10 years, what the winner did the following game and what the loser did the following game as well.
All right, Ralph, let's talk about coaches that like to prep like this is a regular season game. There's got to be a couple of them out there.
Well, Kelly, again, this changed quite a bit because historically, I would say 80% of the coaches used to treat the old game 3 of preseason games like their warm-up game, because the 4th week you played your rookies or didn't play many. A couple coaches were different. At Tennessee, he would prep his team game 4 and play his starters. He would always have a huge edge. So teams don't do that quite the same as they have. But as I mentioned earlier, even if they say, we're not game planning, but we're treating this like a game week, that to me gets an extra check mark when you're prepping. For people that say, we're scheming against a certain type of play, that's something like we're looking for. When teams play each other in the same season, you tend to get more vanilla. You don't want to show teams things. So there are 3 situations this year. Carolina and Detroit play on August 25th. They also play on October 8th. Cleveland and the Jets. Now, they play the Hall of Fame game, and they don't play until December 28th. So there's not much you could take out of that. And Houston and New Orleans play in the preseason and also play October 15th. So when I'm looking at those games, I do tend to take the team with points, and I do tend to lean under, at least initially, because they don't want to show things. One interesting thing, it doesn't apply to this year. If Bill Belichick is playing a team in the preseason and he is playing that team in the regular season, you bet on Bill Belichick. He puts plays in, specifically see how a team reacts. He'll run reverses. He'll run dives. He will put in so many unique plays against that team. He'll use it. He'll make adjustments in the regular season. I've never seen any other coach do what he does. Unfortunately, he doesn't play anyone. Unique travel and quarterback injuries. We talked about one unique travel situation if they come up. But look for those teams on short weeks. And quarterback injuries, there's been some instances where you've signed a quarterback and you've had to play him in your final game because you didn't want to play your starter, you hurt your number 2, your number 3 is banged up. Again, those are situations that you automatically either look to fade or play the under or stay away. I do want to leave this segment and really this tape with one actionable piece of information. In the old preseason, when you used to have 4 games prior to the COVID, you used to play on teams that lose game 1 against a team that wins game 1. It was a profitable 63% situation. Since COVID, that has completely changed. But in the last 2 years, and this is an old-time system as well, but it's gone 70% the last 2 years, when an 0-2 team plays a 2-0 team in game number 3, they have covered 70% of the time, and that is post-COVID with those numbers. So keep an eye on those 0-2 teams playing the 2-0 teams in the final week of the regular season.
Awesome stuff from Ralph at Cal Sports LV. On Twitter, you can get his guide. There's a link to his guide there. You can also get it on his Wager Talk homepage. As Ralph likes to say, it is one of the only times in sports when you can bet on a coach, on a team who is trying to win versus a coach and a team who does not care to win. Ralph has been crushing 76.6% of his preseason plays, 4 and 5% since I started at Wager Talk, and get his entire NFL preseason for just $99. And for an additional $49, you can get a live weekly interactive video on Wednesdays, hanging out with Ralph, getting some Q&A. Ralph, any final thoughts before I let you go?
Nope. Enjoy the preseason. Any thought or notion you have about how a team's going to do, throw it out. It's just taking the data that's in the guide, reading the transcripts, watching the games and the adjustments for game 1, game 2. It's a lot of work, Kelly, but at 66%, it's well worth it.
Guy with the pen, Ralph. We'll see you on Bet On It this fall for some TNA.